My father-in-law didn't look at me when he ended my life. He just looked at his gold Patek watch and gave me 5 minutes. 5 minutes to pack 5 years of brilliance into a cardboard box before security dragged me out in zip ties. My husband didn't stop him. He was too busy adjusting his tie and smirking at the two-year-old intern wearing his college ring around her neck. They thought they were clearing a desk. They thought they were disposing of a disposable wife. But they forgot one thing. I don't just design buildings. I design traps. And while they were celebrating my firing, I was counting down the seconds until their entire billion-dollar empire hit the floor. The eviction notice arrives in 60 seconds. And I'm the one who signed it. If you've ever been discarded by people who used your talent to build their throne, hit subscribe right now. If you're the kind of person who lets people walk over you and stay silent, keep scrolling. This level of justice isn't for the weak. For the rest of you, welcome to the demolition. I remember the smell of the air that morning in Minneapolis. It was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your lungs and reminds you you're alive. I was holding a ceramic mug of coffee, looking out at the skyline from the 40th floor. I'd built 3 of those buildings. Me. Not the name on the door, not the man in the corner office. Just me, my blueprints, and a decade of missed sleep. The office was quiet at 7:30 a.m. It was my favorite time. The floor-to-ceiling glass of Sterling and Associates reflected a world I thought I owned. I had married into this legacy. I had poured my soul into the Sterling Heights project, of $400 million development that was supposed to put this firm on the global map. I thought I was building a future for my family. But looking back, the signs were everywhere. The way the secretaries looked away when I walked by. The way my husband, Marcus, suddenly started working late on projects he didn't even have the credentials to manage. I chose to be blind because it's easier to live in a beautiful lie than a cold truth. My husband walked in. He didn't look at me. He never looked at me anymore. He just adjusted his silk tie, the one I bought him for our anniversary, and whispered, "Dad wants you in the boardroom. Now." I checked my watch. "The board meeting isn't until 10, Marcus. I still have to finish the load-bearing specs for the North Tower." "Now, Elena," he snapped. He didn't even turn his head. He just stood there, looking at his own reflection in the glass, admiring the suit I'd paid for with my last bonus. I followed him down the hall. The carpet felt thicker today, like it was trying to trip me. Every person I passed, people I'd trained, people whose kids' names I knew, suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. The boardroom was full. Every department head, every board member, and there sat Arthur Sterling. My father-in-law, a man I had treated like a second father for 7 years. He didn't offer me a seat. He didn't even offer me a nod. "Elena," Arthur said. His voice was like gravel being crushed under a boot. "We've reviewed the restructuring plan for the fiscal year. We've decided that the firm needs a new direction. A leaner approach." "A leaner approach?" I asked, my voice echoing in the sterile room. "Arthur, we just secured the state contracts. My team is ahead of schedule. Your services," Arthur said, leaning forward into the light, "are no longer required. Effective immediately." Silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears until you feel sick. I looked at Marcus. He was leaning against the wall in the back, checking his fingernails. "Is this a joke?" I whispered. "It's a business decision," Marcus chimed in. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it, pure, unadulterated resentment. "We need visionaries, Elena. Not just calculators." Beside him, Sarah, a junior intern I'd mentored, a girl I'd bought lunch for when she couldn't afford rent, stepped forward. She wasn't wearing her intern badge. She was wearing a senior project manager's tag. My tag. And on a chain around her neck, tucked just under her collar, was a ring I recognized. Marcus's college ring. The one he told me he'd lost at the gym 3 months ago. The room blurred. The betrayal wasn't a single blow. It was 1,000 tiny needles. My husband. My father-in-law. My protégé. They weren't just firing me. They were erasing me. "Arthur," I said, my voice regaining a terrifying steadiness. "I designed every inch of Sterling Heights. You can't fire me." Arthur checked his gold Patek Philippe. "It's 9 a.m., Elena. You have 5 minutes to clear your desk. If you're still here at 9:05, security will escort you out in zip ties. We've already deactivated your key card. Don't make this more pathetic than it already is." 5 minutes. To pack up 5 years, to pack up a marriage, to pack up a life. I stood there for a moment, looking at the 22 designers sitting at the long table, my team. The people who actually did the work while Marcus took the credit. They were looking at their laps. They were terrified. I looked at Arthur. Then at Marcus. Then at the girl wearing my husband's ring. 5 minutes, I repeated. You're right, Arthur. I don't need 5 minutes. I only need one. I turned my back on them and walked out. But I didn't go to my desk. I went to the central server hub in the middle of the open plan office. Arthur thought he was taking my job. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to his destruction. Because while Arthur owned the company, I owned the people who made it run. The walk from the boardroom to my desk felt like a mile. Every click of my heels on that expensive Italian marble sounded like a second ticking off my life. 5 minutes. Arthur had given me 5 minutes as a final act of humiliation, a way to show the entire office that I was being discarded like a faulty piece of equipment. I reached my cubicle. It wasn't just a desk, it was a command center. There were rolls of vellum, structural models of the North Tower, and a framed photo of me and Marcus at our wedding. I didn't touch the photo. I looked at it for a split second at the man smiling beside me and realized I didn't recognize him. He wasn't the man I married. He was just a placeholder. A parasite who had used my talent to stay relevant in his father's eyes. I grabbed a single cardboard box from under the desk. Don't touch the hard drive, Elena. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Marcus. He was standing there, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe of the office he didn't deserve. He had a smug, lopsided grin, the look of a man who thought he had finally won. That hard drive contains Sterling and Associates' intellectual property. He sneered. Leave it. Now. I stopped. I looked at the black external drive sitting on my desk. Then I looked at him. Marcus, this drive contains my personal portfolio. The algorithms I wrote for the wind load tests. Things you wouldn't understand even if I drew them in crayon for you. Doesn't matter, he said, stepping closer. I could smell his expensive cologne, the one I'd picked out for him. Dad says everything you touched while on the clock belongs to us. You're leaving with nothing. No files, no house, no dignity. I felt a heat rising in my chest. Not the heat of sadness, but the white-hot glow of a furnace. I looked past him. My team, the Engine 22, were standing in a semicircle around my desk. They weren't working. They weren't looking at their screens. They were watching the man I loved treat me like a criminal. David, my lead structural engineer, was a man of few words. He had 2 kids in college and a mortgage in the suburbs. He had everything to lose. He looked at Marcus, then he looked at the box in my hands. Elena, David said, his voice steady. Do you need help carrying that? Marcus snapped his head toward David. Sit down, David. This doesn't concern you unless you want to be the next one out the door. Arthur's voice boomed over the intercom system, echoing through the rafters. 3 minutes, Elena. Security is on the elevator. I looked at David. I didn't say a word. I just gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. David reached down. He didn't grab my box. He reached for his own security badge, clipped to his belt. He unclipped it. The sound of the plastic hitting the wood of his desk was as loud as a gunshot in the silent office. Marcus blinked. What are you doing? David, sit down. Then came the next one. Sarah Jane, the head of interior design. She'd worked for the Sterlings for 12 years. She walked over, stood right next to me, and dropped her badge. Then Mark. Then Elena P. Then Miguel. It was a rhythmic, soul-crushing percussion. One by one, the 22 most talented architects and engineers in the state of Minnesota were resigning in real time. Stop it, Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. You're all under contract. You can't just quit. I stepped toward Marcus, my face inches from his. Whisper, they aren't quitting, Marcus. They're just following their leader. And as of 60 seconds ago, that's not you. The elevator dings. 2 security guards in gray uniforms step out. They look confused. They were expecting to escort one woman out. Instead, they see 23 people standing with their boxes packed. Arthur comes storming out of the boardroom. He sees the empty desks. He sees the badges piled up like discarded shells on a beach. What is this? Arthur demands. His face is a shade of purple I've never seen before. David. Get back to your station. We have the Sterling Heights filing tomorrow. David looked at Arthur with a pitying smile. The filing is based on Elena's signatures, Arthur. Without her, the permits are invalid. And without us, you're just a man in a very expensive, very empty room. I'll sue you. Arthur screamed. I'll tie you up in court for a decade. You signed non-competes. I stepped forward, the elevator doors opening behind me. I felt the cool air of the shaft on my back. Check the keyman clause, Arthur, I said, my voice echoing. 3 years ago, when you were too drunk on scotch to read the fine print of the new employment agreements, I added a provision. If the lead architect, that's me, is terminated without cause, the entire department's non-compete clauses are nullified. They are free agents. And they are coming with me. Arthur looked like he was having a stroke. He turned to Marcus, who was looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. She's lying, Marcus stammered. She wouldn't, she didn't. I did, I said. And Arthur? One more thing. I reached into my box and pulled out a single legal-sized envelope. I didn't give it to him. I tossed it onto the floor at his feet. That's a formal notice of lease review for this building. You might want to read it before tomorrow morning. Because at midnight, the rent on this floor goes up by 400%. Arthur laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound. You're delusional, Elena. We have a 10-year lease with North Star Holdings. You don't own this building. I stepped into the elevator with my 22 lions. As the doors began to slide shut, I looked Arthur Sterling in the eye for the last time as his daughter-in-law. I don't own the building, Arthur, I whispered as the doors closed. I own North Star Holdings. See you in the morning. The descent felt like it lasted a lifetime. 40 floors. In the reflection of the brass elevator doors, I didn't see the woman who had walked into the building that morning. My eyes were bloodshot, my knuckles white from gripping the cardboard box, but my spine was a steel rod. We hit the lobby. The glass doors of the Sterling building opened to the humid Minneapolis air. My team followed me out like a silent funeral procession. We reached the sidewalk, and for a moment we all just stood there. The city kept moving. Taxis honked. People rushed by with their briefcases, oblivious to the fact that an empire had just fractured on the 40th floor. David was the first to speak. Elena, where are we going? My car is in the company garage. My keycard is probably already deactivated. I looked at him. His face was etched with the sudden realization of what he'd just done. He had a mortgage. He had kids. And he had just walked away from a 6-figure salary for a woman who didn't even have an office anymore. Go home, David, I said, my voice sounding distant even to me. Take the afternoon. Hug your kids. I'll send an address to everyone's personal email by 6 p.m. I've been preparing for this day for 6 months. The team dispersed. Some gave me quick hugs, others just a solemn nod. They trusted me. It was a weight on my shoulders heavier than the building I'd just left. When the last of them disappeared into the subway entrance, I was alone. I walked to my SUV. I sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. I just stared at the steering wheel. Then my phone chimed. A notification from our shared home security app. Front door unlocked. Then another. Garage door opened. Marcus was home. I drove toward Wayzata, the neighborhood where the successful lived. Our house was a sprawling modern farmhouse, ironic, considering Marcus didn't know how to grow a weed, let alone run a farm. I'd designed that house. I'd picked every tile, every light fixture, every blade of grass. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw a black sedan I didn't recognize. I walked up to the front door. I reached for my keys, but before I could insert them, the door swung open. Marcus stood there. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore. He was holding a glass of scotch, the 8-year-old Macallan I'd bought him for his promotion. You're late, he said. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked bored. The locksmith already finished the interior doors. Your stuff is in the back. The back? I pushed past him. The house smelled like her. Sarah's perfume, that cloying, cheap floral scent, was hanging in the air of my foyer. I walked into the kitchen, and there she was. Sarah. She was wearing my silk robe. My robe. She was sitting at the marble island, sipping tea from my favorite mug. Elena, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I'm so sorry it had to end this way. Truly. But Marcus needs someone who supports his vision, not someone who tries to overshadow it. I didn't throw a fit. I walked to the mudroom. There, piled on the floor like a heap of trash, were my clothes. My designer dresses, my work boots, my sketches all tossed into the dirt where the dogs slept. My laptop was sitting on top of the pile. The screen was smashed. You broke my computer, Marcus? I turned to face him. He was leaning against the kitchen island, laughing softly with Sarah. It was company property, remember? Marcus said. I had to ensure the data was secure. Consider it a lesson in corporate loyalty. I looked at the two of them. They looked so smug. They thought they had stripped me of everything. My job, my team, my home, my tools. You think you're so smart, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You think Arthur is going to protect you? You think this girl is going to stay when the money dries up? The money isn't going anywhere, Elena, Marcus spat. We have the Sterling Heights project. We have the investors. And as of this morning, we have the Engine 22's replacement already being interviewed. You're a footnote. A mistake I'm finally erasing. I picked up my bag. I didn't take the clothes. I didn't take the broken laptop. I took my dignity. I told Arthur to check the land lease, I said, walking toward the door. He didn't listen. Maybe you should. You have 12 hours to find a new office, Marcus. Because at 8 a.m. tomorrow, the sheriff is arriving at Sterling and Associates with an eviction notice. Marcus put down his glass. What are you talking about? My father has owned that lot for 30 years. No, I said, my hand on the doorknob. Your father leased that lot from my grandfather. And when my grandfather passed away last year, he didn't leave it to my mother. He left it to a holding company, North Star Holdings. I turned back to him, one last time. I am the sole owner of North Star, Marcus. And I just terminated the lease for hostile environment violations. I'm not just firing you from my life. I'm evicting your entire legacy. I walked out and slammed the door. As I reached my car, I heard the first sound of true panic from inside the house. Marcus was yelling into his phone, calling his father. But it was too late. The sun was setting over Lake Minnetonka, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I had the land. I had the team. And tomorrow, I was going to take the sky. There, piled on the floor like a heap of trash, were my clothes. My designer dresses, my work boots, my sketches all tossed into the dirt where the dogs slept. My laptop was sitting on top of the pile. The screen was smashed. You broke my computer, Marcus? I turned to face him. He was leaning against the kitchen island, laughing softly with Sarah. It was company property, remember? Marcus said. I had to ensure the data was secure. Consider it a lesson in corporate loyalty. I looked at the two of them. They looked so smug. They thought they had stripped me of everything. My job, my team, my home, my tools. You think you're so smart, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You think Arthur is going to protect you? You think this girl is going to stay when the money dries up? The money isn't going anywhere, Elena, Marcus spat. We have the Sterling Heights project. We have the investors. And as of this morning, we have the Engine 22's replacement already being interviewed. You're a footnote. A mistake I'm finally erasing. I picked up my bag. I didn't take the clothes. I didn't take the broken laptop. I took my dignity. I told Arthur to check the land lease, I said, walking toward the door. He didn't listen. Maybe you should. You have 12 hours to find a new office, Marcus. Because at 8 a.m. tomorrow, the sheriff is arriving at Sterling and Associates with an eviction notice. Marcus put down his glass. What are you talking about? My father has owned that lot for 30 years. No, I said, my hand on the doorknob. Your father leased that lot from my grandfather. And when my grandfather passed away last year, he didn't leave it to my mother. He left it to a holding company, North Star Holdings. I turned back to him, one last time. I am the sole owner of North Star, Marcus. And I just terminated the lease for hostile environment violations. I'm not just firing you from my life. I'm evicting your entire legacy. I walked out and slammed the door. As I reached my car, I heard the first sound of true panic from inside the house. Marcus was yelling into his phone, calling his father. But it was too late. The sun was setting over Lake Minnetonka, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I had the land. I had the team. And tomorrow, I was going to take the sky. I sat in my SUV at the end of the driveway of the house that was no longer mine. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the falling sleet. In Minnesota, the rain in late autumn feels like needles. I watched the upstairs bedroom window, our bedroom, as the light flickered off. I wondered if he was using my pillow. I wondered if he had already cleared my jewelry off the vanity to make room for Sarah's cheap perfumes. It's a strange thing, watching your life be inhabited by a parasite in real time. You expect to feel a hole in your chest, but all I felt was a cold, sharpening clarity. I pulled away, the tires crunching over the gravel. I had nowhere to go, yet I had everywhere to be. I drove toward North Minneapolis, into the industrial district where the old brick warehouses stood like sleeping giants. My grandfather, a man who smelled of sawdust and peppermint, had left me more than just land leases. He had left me a ghost. I pulled up to a rusted iron gate. Behind it sat a 3-story timber and brick warehouse. To anyone else, it was a relic of a bygone era. To me, it was the birthplace of Engine 22. I stepped out of the car. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It had been vibrating nonstop for 3 hours. Missed call, Arthur Sterling, 14. Missed call, Marcus 22. Text, Marcus, you're insane. You can't do this. Call me now, or I'm calling the police. I deleted the thread without reading the rest. Inside the warehouse, the air was freezing. I flipped a heavy industrial switch, and rows of flickering fluorescent lights buzzed to life, humming a low electric song. I walked to the center of the floor, my footsteps echoing off the rafters. You're late. I spun around. David was sitting on a stack of reclaimed lumber in the corner, a laptop glowing on his knees. Behind him, Sarah Jane and Miguel were dragging a folding table across the floor. What are you guys doing here? I whispered. I told you to go home. I told you to wait for my email. David stood up, the blue light of the screen catching the gray in his beard. We did go home, Elena. We talked to our families. We told our wives and husbands that we just walked out on the biggest firm in the city. He walked toward me, holding out a thermos of coffee. And then we realized, if we don't start tonight, Arthur will have the morning to spin the narrative. He'll tell the press we're disgruntled. He'll tell the clients we stole data. We're here because we aren't waiting for you to lead us. We're already moving. I looked around. Through the shadows, more of them appeared. My team, my 22 lions. They were wearing heavy coats and fingerless gloves, setting up monitors on crates, mapping out the Sterling Heights blueprints from memory. We have a problem though, Sarah Jane said, her breath misting in the cold air. The Sterling Heights project. The physical blueprints are locked in Arthur's vault. The digital files are on their encrypted server. We have the knowledge, but Arthur has the legal ownership of the designs. I walked over to the table and set my cardboard box down. I reached past the personal items and pulled out a small, unassuming black leather ledger. It was my grandfather's. Arthur has the designs, I said, my voice gaining strength. But he doesn't have the foundation. He thinks he's building a $400 million complex. But he's actually building a lawsuit. I opened the ledger. Inside were handwritten notes from 40 years ago. My grandfather didn't just lease the land to Arthur's father. He held the mineral rights and the subterranean structural rights. In 1984, they signed a codicil. Any structure built on this lot that exceeds 20 stories must have the express approval of the landholder for its foundation design. I looked at David. Did Arthur ever send the revised North Tower foundation plans to North Star Holdings for approval? David's eyes widened. No. He said it was a formality. He signed off on it himself, claiming he had power of attorney for the landholder. He forged my grandfather's signature. I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. And since my grandfather died, that power of attorney is void. He's been building a skyscraper on a foundation that is legally non-existent. At 8 a.m., I continued, the city inspector is going to receive an anonymous tip about structural irregularities in the North Tower Foundation. At 8:15 a.m., the sheriff will arrive with the eviction notice for the office. And at 8:30 a.m., Arthur Sterling will realize that his empire is sitting on a sinkhole of his own making. But Elena, Miguel interrupted, if the building is condemned, we lose the project too. We lose everything we worked on. I shook my head. We don't lose it. We save it. We're going to offer the city a solution. A new firm. A new plan. And a new owner for the Sterling legacy. Suddenly, The heavy metal door of the warehouse groaned. The sound of a car skidding on the wet pavement outside echoed into the space. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Tall, frantic, and drenched from the rain. Marcus. He was alone. He looked pathetic, his expensive suit soaked through, his hair matted to his forehead. He held a thick envelope in his hand. "Elena!" He screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I know you're in here. Stop this. My father is having a heart attack. He's in the ER because of you." I stepped out of the circle of light, walking toward my husband. The 22 people behind me stood like a wall of silent judges. "He's not having a heart attack, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing in the rafters. "He's having a realization. There's a difference." Marcus reached out to grab my arm, but David stepped in between us, his massive frame blocking the path. "Stay back," David said quietly. Marcus looked at the team, then at me. He held up the envelope. "He sent me to offer you a deal. $10 million. You walk away, you sign over North Star Holdings and you leave the state. Take the money, Elena. It's more than you'll ever make on your own." I looked at the envelope. $10 million. It was a fortune. It was a quiet life. It was an easy exit. I took the envelope from his hand. I felt the weight of it. Then, I walked over to the industrial trash bin where we'd started a small fire in a drum to keep warm. I dropped the envelope into the flames. "Tell Arthur he's going to need that money for his legal fees," I said. "Now get out of my office." Marcus stared at the fire, his face pale. "Your office?" "Elena, this is a dump." "It's not a dump, Marcus," I said as the flames turned the check to ash. "It's a war room. And you just officially declared yourself the enemy." I watched the orange glow of the burning check until the paper turned into gray flakes of nothing. $10 million. To Marcus, it was a king's ransom. To me, it was the price of my silence, and my soul wasn't on the market. "Elena," David whispered, stepping up beside me. "That was a lot of money. We could have used that to fund the startup for a decade." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the embers. "If I took that money, David, he'd own us forever. You don't take a bribe from a man who's trying to drown you. You take his oxygen." I turned back to the center of the room. The cold was setting in, deep and marrow-chilling, but no one was complaining. We were fueled by something better than heat. We were fueled by the absolute, terrifying thrill of the truth. "Let's get to work," I said. "We have 6 hours before the sun comes up." The next few hours were a blur of blue light and frantic typing. While the rest of Minneapolis slept, Engine 22 was performing an autopsy on Sterling and Associates. We weren't just looking for structural errors anymore. We were looking for the rot that started at the top. Around 3 a.m., Sarah Jane called me over to her station. She had been digging through the digital archives we'd managed to sync before the lockout files Marcus thought were hidden in subfolders labeled Utility Tax 2019. "Elena, you need to see this," she said. Her voice was small, hesitant. I leaned over her shoulder. On the screen was a series of wire transfers. They weren't from the firm. They were from a private account under Marcus's name. The destination? An offshore shell company called S.J. Renaissance. "S.J., I whispered. "Sarah Jane?" "No. Sarah Jennings. The intern. The girl in my robe." I scrolled through the dates. The transfers started 18 months ago. Thousands of dollars every month. But it wasn't just hush money. As I opened the attachments, my heart stopped. They were my sketches. Not the finished ones I submitted to Arthur. These were my private conceptual drafts. Designs for a modular housing project I dreamed of building for the city's homeless veterans, a project I told Marcus was my legacy piece. I told him it was the most important thing I'd ever designed. And he had sold it. He didn't just cheat on me with her body, he cheated on me with my mind. He had been stripping my portfolio and selling it to a competitor in Chicago, piece by piece, while I was sleeping right next to him. Sarah wasn't just his mistress, she was his broker. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my nails dug into the wood. Every "I love you," every "you're doing great, honey," every late night he encouraged me to stay at the office. It was all to give him more time to steal. "There's more," Sarah Jane said, her eyes filling with tears. "Look at the project title on the Chicago filing." I looked. The project wasn't called the Veterans Modular Housing. It was called The Marcus Sterling Legacy. I walked away from the screen. I walked into the dark corner of the warehouse where the light didn't reach. I put my forehead against the cold brick, and I closed my eyes. The pain was physical. It felt like a serrated blade was being pulled slowly through my chest. I had given that man everything. I had built his father's company. I had shielded him from his own incompetence. I had loved him. And he had looked at my heart and seen a profit margin. Elena? David's voice was soft behind me. What do you want to do? We can call the police. This is industrial espionage. It's a felony. I stood up straight. I wiped the moisture from my eyes with the back of my hand. The sadness was gone. It had been incinerated, replaced by a cold crystalline fury that felt like ice water in my veins. No, I said, turning around. My voice was different now. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and therefore was the most dangerous person in the room. We don't call the police. Not yet. Why not? Because if we call the police, it's a legal matter. It goes to court. It stays in the shadows for years. I said, walking back into the light. I don't want Marcus in a jail cell. I want him in the street. I want him to watch as the world finds out exactly what kind of visionary he is. I looked at the clock. 4:45 a.m. Sarah Jane, can you trace the IP address of the last upload to that Chicago firm? Already on it. It was uploaded from your home network, Elena, 3 nights ago. While I was making him dinner. While I was telling him about my day. Good, I said. Now, find the contact for the lead architect at that Chicago firm. We're going to send them a little gift before their morning meeting. I turned to David. And the city inspector. Call him. Tell him there's a whistleblower at the Sterling Heights site who has the original, unedited soil samples from before the foundation was poured. Tell him he needs to be there at 8 a.m. sharp. I reached into my box and pulled out my phone. I unblocked one number. I called the local news desk of WCCO Minneapolis. Hi, my name is Elena Sterling, I said, my voice steady as a rock. I'm the lead architect for Sterling Heights. If you want to see the biggest corporate scandal in Minnesota history unfold in real time, you might want to have a camera crew at the Sterling building in 3 hours. Bring a drone. You're going to want the aerial view when the signs come down. I hung up. I looked at my team. 22 people were staring at me, their faces illuminated by the screens. Today, I said, we stop building for them. Today we start tearing them down. 6 a.m. The world was waking up, but Engine 22 hadn't slept. We were vibrating on a diet of black coffee, adrenaline, and the shared knowledge that in 2 hours, the ground would shift under the Sterling's feet. I stood over a map of the city. To everyone else, Minneapolis was a grid of streets and parks. To me, it was a battlefield. I knew every structural weakness of Arthur's empire, both the ones made of steel and the ones made of secrets. Elena, look, David said, pointing to a live feed of the Sterling building's perimeter. Security is doubling up. Arthur must have spent the night calling in favors. On the screen, I saw black SUVs pulling onto the sidewalk. Men in suits, Arthur's personal goons, were standing guard at the revolving doors. They were expecting a fight. They were expecting me to show up with a lawyer and a scene. They're looking at the front door, I whispered, a cold smile touching my lips. They always forget to look at the ground they're standing on. Miguel, is the drone ready? Calibrated and waiting, Miguel replied, tapping a tablet. The 4K feed is linked to the news desk at WCCO. The moment the inspector arrives, the world sees everything. Sarah Jane, the Chicago firm? I sent the gift, she said, her fingers dancing across the keys. I sent them the original, time-stamped metadata of your sketches from 3 years ago. By the time Marcus walks into his office, their legal department will be drafting a cease and desist that will bury him. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind of power Arthur had, the kind bought with a name, but the kind earned through competence. I had been the silent engine of that firm for so long that they forgot I held the steering wheel. 7:15 a.m. The first victory came in the form of a simple email notification. Subject: Notice of immediate work stoppage, Sterling Heights site. I let out a breath I'd been holding since yesterday. The city inspector hadn't even reached the site yet, but the anonymous files we sent regarding the foundation's structural integrity were so damning that the city had no choice but to freeze the permits. Step 1, I said to the room. The team let out a small cheer. but I raised my hand. Don't celebrate yet. Stopping the work is easy. Taking the land back is the real fight. I grabbed my coat. David, you're with me. The rest of you, stay on the feeds. If Marcus tries to wipe the servers remotely, trigger the mirror encryption we set up. Don't let them delete a single lie. We drove toward the Sterling building. As we got closer, the traffic became a nightmare. News vans were already circling the block like sharks sensing blood in the water. I pulled my SUV onto the curb, right in front of the main entrance. The security guard, a man named Terry who I used to bring coffee to, stepped forward, looking pained. Elena, please, Terry whispered, leaning into my window. Arthur said if I let you in, I'm fired. Don't make me do this. I looked at Terry. I saw the fear in his eyes. Arthur ruled by terror. I ruled by respect. I'm not coming in, Terry, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I'm just here to watch the show. And you might want to move your car out of the basement garage. It's going to be a restricted zone in about 10 minutes. Terry blinked, looked at the news crews, and then looked at the building. He slowly backed away and unclipped his radio. Base, this is Terry. I'm taking my break. Now. At 7:55 a.m., the sheriff's department vehicle pulled up behind me. 2 deputies stepped out, holding a thick stack of legal documents. Elena Sterling? The lead deputy asked. That's me, I said, handing him the original title deed for North Star Holdings. Everything is in order. The lease was violated under Section 8.2 illegal activity on the premises and failure to maintain structural safety. You have the eviction warrant. The deputy nodded. He looked up at the 40-story glass monolith. This is going to be a messy one. Messy for them, I said. For me, it's just spring cleaning. We walked toward the glass doors. Through the window, I could see Arthur in the lobby. He was screaming at a junior architect, waving his cane in the air. He saw me. Our eyes locked through the glass. He didn't see the broken woman he'd fired 24 hours ago. He saw a landlord. He lunged toward the door, but the deputies stepped in front of him. Arthur Sterling? The deputy shouted over the din of the news cameras. You have 30 minutes to vacate these premises. This building has been seized by North Star Holdings. Arthur's face went a shade of purple that made me wonder if he really was having a heart attack. But then I saw Marcus. He was standing by the elevators, staring at his phone. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I knew why. The Chicago firm had called. I stepped up to the glass, tapped on it with my wedding ring, the one I still hadn't taken off, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I let the ring fall onto the concrete at my feet. Time's up, Marcus, I mouthed through the glass. The lobby of the Sterling building was a masterpiece of intimidation: high ceilings, cold granite, and a massive portrait of Arthur's father staring down at anyone who dared to enter. But today, the intimidation was flowing in the opposite direction. You can't do this. Arthur's voice was a ragged screech. He was leaning heavily on his cane, surrounded by his personal security, but the deputies weren't budging. This is a billion-dollar firm. You're trespassing on private property. The lead deputy didn't even blink. He held up the court order. The land belongs to North Star Holdings, Mr. Sterling. The lease agreement states that any illegal activity or compromise of structural safety constitutes an immediate breach. We have reports of both. You have 28 minutes left. I stood just behind the deputies, my arms crossed. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie of my own life. I looked at Marcus. He was white as a sheet, his phone still pressed to his ear. He wasn't looking at his father. He was looking at me. Elena, Marcus stepped forward, his voice cracking. Elena, talk to me. We can fix this. The Chicago thing, it was a misunderstanding. It was a joint venture I was setting up for us. For us? I asked, my voice echoing in the vast lobby. Is that why you filed it under your name alone? Is that why you were transferring the profits to an account Sarah Jennings manages? At the mention of her name, the lobby went silent. Even the reporters leaned in. Sarah was standing by the elevators, her senior project manager badge pinned crookedly to her blouse. She looked at Marcus, then at me. I was just doing what Marcus told me to do, she stammered. He said you were unstable. He said you were trying to sabotage the firm. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a woman who had seen the bottom of the pit and realized she could climb. I'm unstable? I looked at Arthur. Arthur, did Marcus tell you where that $10 million he offered me last night was coming from? Arthur turned his head slowly toward his son. What 10 million? He didn't tell you? I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Marcus didn't have 10 million in the company accounts. He took a high-interest bridge loan against the Sterling Heights equipment, the cranes, the loaders, the steel using a forged signature. Your signature, Arthur. The silence that followed was suffocating. Arthur looked at Marcus, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. Marcus didn't deny it. He couldn't. He just looked at the floor. You forged my name. Arthur whispered. To pay off your wife to go away. I was trying to save the project. Marcus exploded, his face turning a frantic red. She was going to ruin everything, Dad. I had to get her out of the picture. But Arthur wasn't listening. He looked at me, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw something in his eyes other than arrogance. I saw fear. Elena, Arthur said, his voice trembling. Whatever Marcus did, it's not the firm. We can settle this. I'll make you a partner. A full partner. Just stop the eviction. If we lose this office today, the investors will pull out of Sterling Heights by noon. I looked at the man who had given me 5 minutes to clear my desk. I looked at the man who had watched his son humiliate me and stayed silent. You're right, Arthur, I said. The investors will pull out. In fact, they already are. I called the Henderson Group an hour ago. I showed them the foundation reports. They've already triggered the morality and competence clause in their funding agreement. But then, the elevator doors behind them chimed. A man in a dark gray suit stepped out. He wasn't a deputy. He wasn't a reporter. He was a lawyer. I recognized Mr. Henderson's personal counsel. Actually, Elena, the lawyer said, walking into the center of the lobby. There's been a development you should be aware of. I frowned. What development? The lawyer looked at Marcus, then back at me. Mr. Marcus Sterling didn't just forge his father's signature for a loan. He signed over the entirety of the Sterling Heights intellectual property to a third party last night at 11 p.m., in exchange for a rescue package. My heart skipped a beat. To who? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. To Sarah Jennings' father. Who, as it turns out, is the majority shareholder of the Chicago firm Marcus was selling your designs to. I looked at Sarah. She wasn't trembling anymore. She was smiling. A slow, predatory smile that made my skin crawl. She walked over to Marcus and took his arm, but not with affection, with ownership. You thought you were the only one with a secret plan, Elena? Sarah asked, her voice silky and triumphant. Marcus didn't just choose me because I'm younger. He chose me because my family is richer than yours will ever be. We don't need this building. We already moved the project assets to Chicago. You can have the land, Elena, but the Sterling Heights project? That belongs to me now. I felt the world tilt. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me for an affair. He had sold the entire company, his father's legacy, out from under everyone, just to spite me. Arthur let out a choked sound and collapsed into a chair. Marcus wouldn't look at any of us. I was standing on my land, but the prize I had worked for my entire life was being driven out of the state by the woman who was wearing my robe. You think you won? I whispered. I know I did, Sarah said, clicking her heels as she turned toward the door. Come on, Marcus. We have a flight to catch. But as they reached the door, my phone buzzed. A text from David back at the warehouse. Text, Elena, stop them. I just found the final file. Sarah isn't who she says she is. Check your email. Now. I stood paralyzed for a split second, watching Marcus and Sarah walk toward the exit. Sarah's hand was draped over Marcus's arm, a victor's trophy. They thought they had performed the ultimate heist. They hadn't just stolen my husband or my job. They had stolen the $400 million blueprint of my soul and were taking it to Chicago. My fingers trembled as I swiped open David's email. The file was a PDF labeled, Background, Investigation, Jennings, Final. I scrolled. My eyes darted across the text. My heart, which had been heavy with defeat just a moment ago, began to pulse with a new, dangerous rhythm. Marcus. Sarah. I called out. My voice wasn't a scream. It was a whip crack that stopped them dead in their tracks just 3 feet from the revolving doors. Sarah turned, her lip curling. Give it up, Elena. You have the land. You have the dirt. We have the future. Go play in your warehouse. David is very good at his job, I said, stepping toward them, ignoring the reporters pressing their microphones against the glass. He didn't just look into Sarah's father. He looked into the Chicago firm you think you're joining. Jennings and Associates Architecture. I looked at Sarah. Her smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. Interesting name, I continued. But here's the thing, Sarah. Your father isn't the majority shareholder of a Chicago firm. Your father is a twice-convicted felon who ran a Ponzi scheme in Des Moines 10 years ago. And Jennings and Associates. It's a shell company. It has no offices, no staff, no licenses. Marcus turned to Sarah, his hand dropping from her arm like it had been burned. What is she talking about? Sarah? The bridge loan. The equity. You said your father was backing the project. Sarah's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. She's lying, Marcus. She's desperate. She's trying to keep you here. Am I? I held up my phone so Marcus could see the mugshots David had unearthed. This is your billionaire father-in-law, Sarah. He didn't build Chicago. He built a cell block in Iowa. And that rescue package Marcus signed last night? It wasn't a transfer of assets to a new firm. It was a power of attorney that gives Sarah Jennings the right to liquidate every piece of sterling equipment and vanish with the cash. Marcus lunged for Sarah's bag, but she stepped back, her eyes suddenly turning from a kitten's to a cobra's. The sweet intern was gone. In her place was a woman who had been playing a much longer game than any of us. You idiot, Sarah hissed at Marcus. Did you really think I loved you? You're a mediocre architect with a daddy complex. You were just the key to the vault. She turned to run for the door, but the deputies were already there. They didn't know about the fraud yet, but they knew she was a flight risk in an active eviction zone. They crossed their arms, blocking her path. Arthur, I said, turning back to my father-in-law. He was looking at his son with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. Marcus didn't just lose the project. He handed the keys to a professional grifter. In 1 hour, the creditors are going to find out that the Sterling Heights assets have been signed over to a ghost. The firm isn't just bankrupt, Arthur. It's a crime scene. Arthur closed his eyes. A single tear tracked through the wrinkles on his cheek. It's over. Everything I built. Gone. No, I said, stepping into his line of sight. Not everything. But we have to move now. Marcus signed that document under false pretenses. It's voidable. But we need a legitimate entity to absorb the contracts before the city pulls the permits for good at noon. Marcus stumbled toward me. Elena, please. I didn't know. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. I looked at the man I had once loved. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of my clothes in the rain and my smashed laptop. You're right, Marcus. You will sign whatever I want, I said. You're going to sign a full confession of the forgery. You're going to sign over your remaining shares of the firm to Engine 22. And then, you're going to leave this city and never look back. I turned to David, who had just arrived at the lobby with a suitcase full of documents. David, get the notary. We have 20 minutes to create a new company and save the North Tower. What are we calling it? David asked, his pen ready. I looked at the Sterling logo on the wall, the massive gold. I looked at the rain outside, and the way the sun was trying to break through the clouds. We aren't calling it Sterling, I said. Call it Ascendant Architecture. Because we're done building for the people on the ground. We're building for the people who aren't afraid of the heights. I looked at Sarah, who was being handcuffed by a deputy for questioning regarding the fraudulent shell company. She glared at me, her teeth bared. You think you saved the project, Elena, she spat. The investors are already gone. You have a building with no foundation and no money. You're just the queen of a graveyard. I smiled. I'm not the queen of a graveyard, Sarah. I'm the landlord. And you're just a tenant who's being evicted. I turned to the news cameras. This is Elena Sterling, CEO of Ascendant Architecture. To the investors of Sterling Heights, don't pull your money. In 10 minutes, you're going to receive a new proposal, one that actually holds weight. I walked back toward the elevators. I didn't look back at Marcus. I didn't look back at Arthur. I had a war to win, and the first shot had only just been fired. The transition from the Sterling lobby to the temporary war room on the 39th floor was a blur of chaos. While the deputies cleared the rest of the staff, my team, the Engine 22, had moved in like a tactical unit. We didn't need furniture. We had crates, we had laptops, and we had the truth. I stood in the center of the office I had been fired from just 24 hours ago. The Sterling & Associates gold lettering on the glass door had been covered with a simple piece of white paper that read, Ascendant Architecture. Elena, we have a problem, David said, his face illuminated by the harsh glare of 4 different monitors. The Henderson Group, the primary investors, they aren't answering the phone. Their lead counsel just sent a memo. They aren't just pulling out of Sterling Heights. They're filing for a total loss insurance claim. I froze. A total loss claim? The building hasn't even been condemned yet. They don't care, Sarah Jane chimed in, her voice tight. They heard foundation failure and forgery, and they decided to cut their losses. If they file that claim, the city is legally required to demolish the North Tower shell within 48 hours for public safety. Everything we're trying to save will be a pile of rubble by Friday. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a business move. A total loss claim was a scorched earth tactic. Someone was whispering in Henderson's ear, telling him that the building couldn't be saved even with me at the helm. Who's the lead adjuster for their insurance? I asked. A firm called Lakeside Risk Management, David replied. But Elena, look at the board of directors for Lakeside. He clicked a button, and a corporate organizational chart appeared on the wall. At the very top, in a position of senior consultant, was a name that made the room feel like it had lost all oxygen. You think you know who the villain is. You think it's the cheating husband or the lying intern. But sometimes, the real monster is the one who taught them how to bite. If you've ever realized your mentor was actually your biggest obstacle, subscribe now. We are exposing the rot at the very top. If you think a father should ever destroy his own legacy just to spite his daughter-in-law, tell us why in the comments. We'd love to see your logic. I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach. Arthur hadn't collapsed in the lobby because he was heartbroken. He had collapsed because he was acting. He knew the firm was dead. He knew Marcus was a liability, so he was triggering the insurance payout, a $200 million failure policy that he would personally profit from as a consultant for the adjuster. He was going to burn the building down legally, collect the check, and leave me standing on a plot of empty dirt with 22 unemployed people. He's going to kill the project to save his wallet, I whispered. He doesn't care about the architecture. He never did. It was always just a shell game. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. Below, in the back alleyway, I saw Arthur's black town car. He wasn't in the hospital. He was sitting in the back seat, staring up at the building, waiting for the wrecking ball he had just summoned. David, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. What do we have on the soil samples? The real ones. Not the ones Arthur forged. The original samples show the ground is stable, David said. But the foundation design Marcus used was based on the fake samples. If we don't fix the foundation design in the next 6 hours, the city engineer will sign off on the demolition order. Then we don't fix it, I said. The room went silent. David looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Elena? If we don't fix it, the building dies. We don't fix the current foundation, I said, turning back to the map. We reveal that the foundation Marcus built doesn't actually exist. Wait, Sarah Jane said, leaning in. What do you mean it doesn't exist? Marcus is lazy, I said. He didn't just forge the samples. He redirected the funds for the high-grade reinforced steel. I looked at the ledger last night. He bought grade B rebar but billed for grade A. The irregularities the city found aren't just structural, they're criminal. But here's the shock. The North Tower isn't sitting on a weak foundation. It's sitting on an incomplete one. I pulled up the site's X-ray scans from last month. Look at the poor depth. He stopped 3 feet short of the bedrock to save money on concrete. He pocketed the difference. But because he didn't hit the bedrock, the building isn't failing yet. It's just floating. If we can prove the theft, I continued, the insurance claim is voided because it's a criminal act by the policyholder's officer Marcus. The insurance won't pay Arthur a dime. And the city will have to give us a cure period to finish the foundation properly. But as I spoke, the elevator dinged. It wasn't the deputies. It wasn't Arthur. It was a woman in a sharp gray suit, flanked by 2 men in tactical vests. She held a badge out. Elena Sterling? She asked. I'm Agent Miller with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We've been monitoring the wire transfers from SJ Renaissance for 6 months. We aren't here for Marcus. We're here for you. My heart stopped. Me? Why me? Because your signature is on every single one of the offshore transfer authorizations, Agent Miller said, stepping forward with handcuffs. According to the digital trail, you weren't the victim, Elena. You were the mastermind. Marcus Sterling just confessed to everything, and he says you forced him to do it. I looked at my team. They looked at me with horror. I looked at the door. Marcus was standing behind the FBI agents, a smug, broken smile on his face. He'd finally done it. He'd found a way to win. I told you, Elena, Marcus whispered as the agents moved in. You shouldn't have burned that check. The cold steel bit into my wrists. I didn't struggle. I didn't scream. I stood perfectly still, my eyes locked on Marcus, who was leaning against the doorframe of the hallway. He looked like a man who had finally exhaled after holding his breath for a decade. He looked relieved. Agent Miller, I said, my voice eerily calm for a woman being led away in front of her employees. I assume you have the original authorization documents. The ones with my physical signature. We have the digital tokens, Miss Sterling, Agent Miller replied, her grip firm on my elbow. They were generated from your private workstation using your biometric override. In the eyes of the law, that's better than a signature. I looked at Marcus. The biometric override. I remembered a night 3 months ago. I was exhausted, asleep on the sofa after a 20-hour shift. Marcus had gently taken my hand to move me to bed. He hadn't been being romantic. He had been using my thumb to unlock my secure encrypted drive. You used me while I was sleeping, I whispered. You didn't just steal my work, Marcus. You stole my identity to frame me for your embezzlement. Save it for the deposition, Elena, Marcus sneered. He looked at Agent Miller. I'm willing to testify to every meeting she forced me to attend. I just want to make things right for my father and the investors. As they began to lead me toward the elevator, the engine 22 stood as a wall of stunned silence. David looked like he was about to charge the agents, but I caught his eye. I gave him a single, sharp shake of my head. Not now. We reached the lobby. The news cameras went into a frenzy. Elena Sterling arrested. Architect of fraud. The headlines were writing themselves in the flashes of the bulbs. I saw Arthur in the back of his town car, lowering the tinted window just an inch. He didn't look happy. He looked satisfied. But they all forgot one thing. I don't just design buildings. I design systems, and every system has a fail-safe. Inside the FBI interrogation room, the air was stale. Agent Miller sat across from me, tossing a folder onto the metal table. Marcus gave us the passwords to the offshore accounts. Elena, we can see the money. It's all sitting there, waiting for you to flee. If I were the mastermind, agent, I said, leaning back as much as the cuffs would allow, why would the money still be there? If I were planning to flee, I would have moved it to a cold wallet months ago. Maybe you got greedy, Miller countered. Or maybe, I said, I knew Marcus was doing it the whole time. Miller paused. Excuse me? I am a lead architect, agent. I track every penny of a $400 million budget. Do you really think I wouldn't notice a $3 million discrepancy in the rebar procurement? I leaned forward, my voice a low, steady hum. I didn't stop him because I needed him to finish the trail. I didn't override the biometrics because I wanted him to think he was succeeding. But what Marcus doesn't know and what your digital forensics team hasn't found yet is the mirror file. Every time my biometric override was used, I continued. A hidden secondary camera in my home office took a time-stamped, high-resolution photo of the user. It's not stored on my workstation. It's stored on the North Star Holdings cloud server. Miller's eyes widened. She tapped her earpiece. Get the tech team on the North Star cloud. Now. You'll find 24 separate photos, I said. All of them show me asleep on the sofa, and Marcus Sterling standing over me with my hand in his. You'll also find the audio recordings. I bugged my own house, agent. I've heard every conversation he had with Sarah Jennings about the Elena problem. The door to the interrogation room burst open. A younger agent whispered something into Miller's ear. Her face went pale. She looked at me, then at the folder. Uncuff her, Miller ordered. I stood up, rubbing my wrists. The marks were red, but the fire in my chest was white-hot. Where is he? I asked. He's still at the Sterling building, Miller said, grabbing her coat. He's signing the final insurance settlement with his father. Then we have to go, I said, heading for the door. Because Marcus isn't just signing a settlement. He's signing a confession for a federal crime he doesn't even know he's committed yet. And I want to be there to see the look on Arthur's face when he realizes he just lost his last get-out-of-jail-free card. I walked out of the precinct. The rain had stopped, and the Minneapolis sun was blindingly bright against the wet asphalt. The execution of my plan had begun. Marcus thought he was the hunter. He had no idea he was already in the cage. I watched the skyline of Minneapolis blur past the window. For years, I looked at those buildings and saw progress. Now, I saw them for what they were, monuments to egos built on foundations of lies. My wrists still burned from the handcuffs, a physical reminder that the man I had loved for 7 years was willing to send me to a federal prison to save his own skin. We're 2 minutes out, Agent Miller said, checking her sidearm. Miss Sterling, I need you to stay behind the primary team. Marcus is desperate. Desperate men are unpredictable. He's not unpredictable, Agent, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. He's a coward. And cowards always follow the same script. We pulled up to the Sterling building. The media circus had tripled in size. The news of my arrest had traveled fast, but the news of my release hadn't broken yet. To the world, I was still the villain. We bypassed the lobby, taking the service elevator directly to the executive floor. When the doors opened, the floor was eerily quiet. Most of the staff had been cleared out by the eviction, leaving only the skeletons of the Sterling's ambition behind. I walked toward Arthur's private office. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. I could hear the clink of ice in a glass and the scratching of a fountain pen on expensive paper. It's done, Dad. Marcus's voice came through the crack. He sounded giddy. The FBI took her. The insurance adjuster just needs your final signature on the liability waiver, and the first $50 million will be wired to the offshore account by morning. We can leave for Chicago tonight. And the girl? Arthur's voice was gravelly, tired. Sarah? She's waiting at the airport, Marcus said. She knows how to handle the Chicago side. We're starting over, Dad. No more Elena breathing down our necks, questioning every invoice. I didn't wait for Agent Miller. I pushed the doors open. The room was bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. Arthur was sitting behind his massive desk, his pen hovering over the final page of a thick legal stack. Marcus was standing by the window, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking out at the city like he'd just conquered it. Marcus's glass hit the floor. The sound of crystal shattering against the hardwood was the only thing that moved for 5 seconds. His face went from a triumphant flush to the color of wet ash. Elena? He whispered. How? You were in custody. The thing about digital footprints, Marcus, I said, stepping into the room, is that they only lead to the person who actually made them. You really should have checked for the hidden cameras in the office before you used my thumb to commit a felony. Marcus scrambled toward the desk, toward his father. Dad, don't listen to her. She's manipulative. She's trying to confuse the situation. But Arthur wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking at Agent Miller, who had just stepped into the room with her badge visible. Arthur dropped the pen, the ink blotted on the $50 million settlement, ruined. Agent, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. What is this? Mr. Sterling, Miller said, we have evidence that your son has been engaging in industrial espionage, embezzlement and identity theft. We also have evidence that you were attempting to file a fraudulent insurance claim based on information you knew to be false. Marcus turned on me, his eyes wide and wild. You did this. You ruined everything. We were a family, Elena. I gave you everything. I gave you my name. You gave me your name. I stepped closer to him, my shadow stretching across the floor. You gave me a name that was built on your father's lies and your own incompetence. I didn't ruin your family, Marcus. I just stopped being the one holding the walls up while you picked the locks on the safe. I looked at the desk at the photos of us. I picked up the one from our wedding in Duluth. I looked at the woman in the white dress. She looked so happy. So naive. I loved you, I said, my voice cracking for the first and last time. I would have built the world for you. But you didn't want a world. You wanted a shortcut. And now you're going to have a very long time to think about that in a very small room. Arthur looked at his son, then at me. Elena, please. The firm. The legacy. If you do this, the Sterling name is dead. The Sterling name died the second you chose a fraud over the person who was actually doing the work, Arthur, I said. And as for the legacy? I'm keeping the blueprints. I'm keeping the team. The only thing that's dying today is the lie. Agent Miller stepped forward, pulling her handcuffs from her belt. Marcus Sterling, you're under arrest for wire fraud and identity theft. Arthur Sterling, you're coming with us for questioning regarding insurance fraud. As they led Marcus away, he stopped beside me. He leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cheap desperation. You think you won, Elena? He hissed. Sarah already left. She has the digital keys to the project servers in Chicago. You have the building, but you have no plans. You're just a landlord of a hollow shell. I watched him go. I didn't tell him that David had already intercepted the Chicago servers 10 minutes ago. I wanted him to have that one last bit of hope. It would make the final reveal so much more painful. I turned to the empty office. I was alone. The sun had finally set and the city lights were flickering on. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Jane. Elena, the city engineer is on line 1. He's seen the real soil reports. He wants to know if we can restart the North Tower pour tomorrow morning. I looked at the empty chair where Arthur used to sit. I didn't sit in it. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. Tomorrow, I whispered. We start the real work. I stood on the skeleton of the 20th floor. The concrete was cold beneath my boots. Marcus and Arthur were gone, spirited away in the back of black government SUVs, but their ghosts were still everywhere. They were in the shoddy rebar, the unpaid invoices, and the looming threat of the total loss order that hadn't been fully rescinded yet. Victory is a strange thing. People think it feels like a coronation. But as I stood there in the dark, it felt more like a haunting. I had the keys to the kingdom. But the kingdom was on fire. Elena? I turned. David was standing by the temporary lift, holding a tablet. His face was etched with exhaustion that went deeper than bone. The city engineer is pushing back, David said, his voice dropping. He saw the reports, but he's terrified of the liability. He says that because the original permits were obtained through Marcus's forged signatures, the entire site is a legal biohazard. He's refusing to sign off on the new pour for tomorrow morning. What? We proved the ground is stable, David. We proved the fraud. It's not about the dirt, Elena. It's about the money. David stepped closer, the blue light of the tablet casting sharp shadows on his face. The Henderson Group didn't just file an insurance claim. They filed a lien against the land. Your land. They're claiming that because the project was started under Sterling and Associates, any recovery of the site belongs to the creditors. They've frozen the construction accounts. I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the Minnesota wind. How much is in the operational account? 0, David said. Marcus cleared it out before the FBI got to him. Sarah Jennings didn't just take the servers, Elena. She was the secondary signatory on the payroll account. The Engine 22. They haven't been paid for the last 2 weeks. And they won't be paid on Friday. I walked to the edge of the slab, looking out over the city. I had 22 people who had walked out of their lives for me. They had families, mortgages. They had stayed up for 48 hours in a freezing warehouse because they believed in me. And I was about to fail them. If we don't pour that concrete tomorrow, the structural integrity of the exposed rebar will be compromised by the coming snowstorm, I said, my voice shaking. If we miss this window, the city will condemn the tower by Monday. Legal or not. We need $2 million for the materials and the crew, David said quietly. By 6 a.m., or the trucks won't roll. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I looked at the contact for the only person I had left. My mother. She lived in a small house in Stillwater, living off my father's modest life insurance and the small trust my grandfather had left for her. I couldn't do it. I couldn't ask her to risk her survival for my pride. But then, a notification popped up on my screen. An alert from the North Star Holdings secure server. Unauthorized access attempt. Chicago, IL. Sarah Jennings. She wasn't just trying to take the servers. She was trying to sell the Ascendant patent, the modular wind-resistant system I developed, to a Chinese firm. She was trying to liquidate my intellectual property before I could even register the new company name. She's selling the patent, David, I whispered. She's in a hotel in Chicago right now, trying to auction off my life's work to the highest bidder. We can't stop her from Chicago, Elena, David said. The FBI is tied up with Marcus and Arthur. They won't move on her until the paperwork clears the interstate hurdle. That takes weeks. I don't need weeks, I said. I looked at the total loss documents in David's hand. I need an airplane. Elena, what are you doing? Sarah thinks she has the only copy of those files. She thinks I'm stuck here, mourning my marriage and fighting the city, I said, a cold, predatory light returning to my eyes. She forgot that I designed the encryption on those files. I don't just have a backdoor, I have a self-destruct. I grabbed my coat. David, call the team. Tell them I'm making a trip. And tell them if they stay until morning, I promise they'll never have to worry about a paycheck again. But they have to trust me for 8 more hours. Where are you going? I'm going to find Sarah, I said, heading for the lift. She wanted to be a senior project manager? I'm going to give her a final performance review she'll never forget. As I hit the button for the lobby, my phone buzzed again. A private number. I answered. Hello? Elena, a woman's voice whispered. It was Sarah. She sounded calm, triumphant. I'm looking at your windload specs right now. They're beautiful. They're worth about $5 million on the open market. I'll make you a deal. Stop the FBI from flagging the SJ Renaissance accounts, and I'll send you enough to pay your little engine for a month. If not, I delete the master files and you're left with a pile of scrap metal in Minneapolis. I smiled into the phone as the lift doors opened. Sarah, I said, keep the files. Truly. I just wanted to make sure you were still logged into the server. It makes it so much easier to geolocate your IP address. See you in 90 minutes. I hung up and ran for my car. The hunt wasn't over. It had just moved to a different city. The flight from Minneapolis to Chicago is barely an hour, but it felt like a journey across a lifetime. I wasn't just chasing a thief. I was chasing the last piece of the puzzle. Sarah Jennings thought she was the predator, but she'd made one fatal mistake. She assumed I was playing the same game she was. I hit the ground at O'Hare and didn't wait for a cab. I had the address, a boutique hotel in the Gold Coast district. David was in my ear via a wireless bud, his voice crackling from the warehouse back in Minnesota. Elena, she's still online, David whispered. She's currently in a Zoom call with a buyer from a firm called Vanguard Global. She's presenting your modular patents right now. You have maybe 10 minutes before the digital transfer is finalized. Lock her out of the secondary nodes, David. I said, walking briskly through the terminal. Don't shut her down yet, just slow her down. Make it look like a connection lag. I reached the hotel. It was a place of marble and hushed whispers, the kind of luxury that hides the rot underneath. I didn't go to the front desk. I went to the business center on the 4th floor. I knew Sarah. She wouldn't do a multi-million-dollar illegal deal on hotel Wi-Fi from her room. She'd want the hardwired security of the executive suite. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the business lounge. There she was. Sarah was sitting in a velvet armchair, a glass of champagne in one hand and her laptop on her knees. She looked radiant. Victory looked good on her. She was laughing, nodding at the screen. Yes, Mr. Chen, she was saying. The encryption keys are ready. Once the escrow hits the account, the Ascendant system is yours. The escrow is going to be a little late, Sarah, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a blade. Sarah jumped, the champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. She looked up, her eyes widening in genuine, raw terror. She scrambled to shut the laptop, but I was already there, my hand slamming the lid down on her fingers. Elena? How? The FBI. The FBI is busy arresting your boyfriend, I said, leaning in until our faces were inches apart. But I'm here for something much more important than Marcus. Sarah tried to stand, but I pushed her back into the chair. You think you're so smart, Sarah. You think you're the mastermind who found a weak man and a rich firm to plunder. I have the files, Elena, she hissed, trying to regain her bravado. Even if you stop this sale, I'll leak them to every firm in the country. Your career will be over. Nobody buys a patent that's already public. See, that's where you're wrong, I said. I pulled a small, silver flash drive from my pocket. You think those files on your laptop are the Ascendant system. But I'm the one who wrote the code. And I didn't just write a wind resistance algorithm. I wrote a poison pill into the metadata, I whispered. The moment you tried to transfer those files to a third-party server, it didn't just copy the data. It activated a tracker that didn't go to the FBI. It went to the Internal Revenue Service of every city where your father the billionaire is currently hiding his assets. Sarah's face went a shade of white that defied physics. What? But that's not the secret, Sarah, I said, my voice dropping to a low rhythmic hum. The real secret is why you were so desperate to get into Sterling and Associates in the first place. You didn't just want Marcus. You wanted the archive. I opened my laptop and flipped it toward her. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a birth certificate. My grandfather didn't just own the land, Sarah. He owned the company that your grandfather started and lost in a gambling debt 50 years ago. You weren't here to steal my work. You were here because you thought you were taking back what was rightfully yours. Sarah's eyes filled with a primal, ancient rage. It was ours. The Sterlings stole it. My family has been in the dirt for 3 generations because of your people. The Sterlings didn't steal it, Sarah. I said. They bought it fairly. But you? You tried to steal it back with lies and betrayal. And in doing so, you didn't just lose the company. You lost your future. I reached out and took her laptop. She didn't fight me. She looked broken. The FBI is downstairs, Sarah. I called them from the plane. They have the warrant for the Chicago shell companies now. I stood up, holding her laptop and my flash drive. But before they take you, I want you to know one thing. I didn't just fix the Ascendant system. I used your login to authorize the final payment for the Engine 22's payroll. You just paid my team their bonuses with your father's hidden offshore money. Sarah let out a choked scream of fury, but the doors to the lounge burst open. FBI agents flooded the room. As they led her away, I sat down in her chair. I looked at the screen. The Zoom call with Vanguard Global was still active. Mr. Chen was staring at me, confused. Mr. Chen, I said, my voice steady and professional. My name is Elena Sterling. I'm the CEO of Ascendant Architecture. The woman you were speaking to was a fraud, but if you're interested in a real partnership, one built on foundations that won't crumble, we should talk. I looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. But first, I said, I have to get back to Minneapolis. I have a tower to build. I stepped off the red-eye flight and drove straight to the site. I didn't go home to change. I didn't go to the warehouse. I went to the mud. The site was a hive of activity. 22 men and women were standing there in the freezing dawn, their breath misting in the air. They weren't just my employees, they were the guardians of this dream. When they saw my SUV pull up, the work didn't stop, but the energy changed. It went from a desperate scramble to a disciplined march. Elena. David ran toward me, his face smeared with grease and grit. The city engineer is here. He's refusing to let the trucks pour. He says the total loss lien hasn't been cleared by the Henderson Group's bank yet. I looked past David. Standing by the main gate was a man in a crisp suit and a yellow hard hat that looked like it had never seen a day of work. Beside him stood a group of lawyers from the Henderson Group, clutching briefcases like shields. They're trying to wait out the clock, David, I said, my voice hardening. They want the storm to hit so they can claim the structural failure and collect their insurance. I walked toward the gate. The city engineer, a man named Henderson, no relation to the investment group, looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Miss Sterling, I have orders. Until that lien is lifted, this site is a legal no-work zone. If a drop of concrete hits that rebar, I'll have your license revoked before noon. The lien is based on a debt to the Henderson Investment Group, correct? I asked, pulling a thick stack of documents from my bag, the ones I'd printed in the Chicago Business Center. Correct. A debt of $12 million in misappropriated funds, the lead lawyer snapped. Then you'll be happy to know the debt has been settled, I said, tossing the papers onto the hood of their sedan. Settled? With what? Your firm is bankrupt, the lawyer sneered. It wasn't settled with my money, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was settled with the Sarah Jennings Recovery Fund. See, when the FBI seized Sarah's offshore accounts in Chicago 3 hours ago, they found the $12 million Marcus had funneled to her. Since those funds were technically stolen from the Henderson project, the FBI released them to the primary creditor. You. The lawyer scrambled to look at the documents. His eyes darted back and forth. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. Check with your head office, I said, crossing my arms. The wire hit your corporate treasury at 5:15 a.m. The lien is legally dead. Which means this land is mine, the project is mine, and you are trespassing. I turned to the city engineer. The permits were filed under North Star Holdings, which I own. The debt is paid. The soil is stable. Do you want to be the man who stopped the most important project in the city's history, or do you want to sign the poor order and get out of the way? The engineer looked at the lawyers, who were now arguing frantically on their phones. He looked at the 22 people behind me, waiting with their hands on the valves. He took his pen and signed the clipboard. Pour it, he whispered. Hit it! David screamed. The sound was glorious. The first rush of wet gray concrete surged through the pipes and hit the foundation with a heavy, wet thud. It was the sound of a heartbeat returning to a body that had been pronounced dead. But the justice wasn't complete. A black sedan pulled up to the perimeter. Arthur Sterling stepped out. He looked smaller than I remembered. His power had been stripped away, his son was in a cell, and his consultancy with the insurance company had been terminated the moment the fraud was revealed. He walked up to the fence, gripping the chain link with trembling hands. He watched the concrete fill the hole he had tried to turn into a grave. Elena, he called out, his voice thin and reedy. I walked over to the fence. I didn't open the gate. You're building it, he said, staring at the tower. You're actually doing it. I was always doing it, Arthur, I said. You just weren't paying attention. I can help. He stammered. I still have the contacts. The Henderson Group will listen to me. We can put the Sterling name back on the tower. It doesn't have to end like this. I looked at the concrete. It was smooth, solid, and permanent. The Sterling name is under 4 feet of wet cement, Arthur, I said, my voice as cold as the morning air. And as for your help? I've already replaced you. I have a new partner. Someone who understands that a building is only as strong as the truth it's built on. Who? Arthur asked, his eyes wide with a last, desperate hope. Who would partner with you now? I pointed toward the entrance. A Silvertown car pulled in. Out stepped Mr. Chen from Vanguard Global, followed by a team of international architects. The world is bigger than Minneapolis, Arthur, I said. You taught me that by trying to shrink mine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a skyline to finish. I turned my back on him and walked toward the tower. I didn't look back when I heard his car pull away. I didn't look back when the first flake of snow started to fall. I just looked up. I sat on a wooden crate in the temporary site office, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in my hands. My clothes were stained with dust, my eyes were heavy with a fatigue that felt like lead, but for the first time in 7 years I could breathe. Really breathe. I looked at the monitors. The North Tower was no longer floating. The bedrock had been reached. The steel was anchored. The city engineer had stayed for the entire pour, and when he left, he didn't just give me a signature, he gave me a salute. It's funny how quickly a scandal becomes a success story once the money is right and the structures are sound. The news crews that were calling me a fraud yesterday were now outside the gate, talking about the miracle on the North Tower. They wanted an interview. They wanted to know how the ex-Mrs. Sterling had saved the city's landmark. But I wasn't the ex-Mrs. Sterling anymore. I was just Elena. David walked in, dropping a stack of newspapers on the table. The headlines were exactly what I expected. Sterling Empire collapses. Son arrested. Firm dissolved. And right next to it, Ascendant Architecture takes the helm. The Engine 22 just got their direct deposits, David said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked 10 years younger. With the bonuses. Sarah Jane is currently crying in the break room. She thought she was going to lose her house, Elena. She was never going to lose her house, David. I would have sold my own car before I let that happen. We know, David said quietly. That's why we followed you. He paused, looking out at the tower. The FBI called. Marcus is being moved to a federal facility for processing. He's been calling the office. He wants to talk to you. He says he has information you might need for the civil suits. Tell him I don't need information from a man whose only talent was forgery, I said. And tell the receptionist to block any calls from the county jail. Marcus Sterling is a ghost. And I don't talk to ghosts. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow was falling harder now, covering the city in a blanket of white. It felt like a cleansing. Everything Arthur and Marcus had touched was being buried, and everything I had built was standing tall. I thought about the house in Wayzata. I'd sent a crew there this morning not to move back in but to clear it out. I'd instructed them to donate everything. The furniture, the clothes, the art. I didn't want a single thread of that life touching my new one. I had moved into a small loft 3 blocks from the warehouse. It was empty, echoing, and perfect. It was a blank blueprint. Elena? Sarah Jane walked in, holding her phone. Mr. Chen from Vanguard is on the line. He's seen the final structural stamps. He wants to discuss expanding the Ascendant system to their projects in Tokyo and Dubai. He's talking about a 10-year partnership. I took the phone. I looked at my team, my 22 lions who were already mapping out the next phase of the tower. They weren't looking at me as a boss. They were looking at me as a partner. Mr. Chen, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm glad you called. But before we talk about Tokyo, let's talk about how we're going to change the skyline of this city first. As I spoke, my personal phone vibrated in my pocket. A private message from a lawyer I didn't recognize. Miss Sterling, I am representing a group of silent investors who held shares in your grandfather's original company. They've been watching the events of the last 48 hours. They believe there is a second trust, hidden in the North Star Holdings land deeds, that you haven't discovered yet. It involves the property adjacent to the North Tower. I looked out at the empty lot next to our site. I thought I had taken everything back, but it seemed my grandfather had one last secret waiting for me. David, I said, hanging up with Mr. Chen. Grab the original North Star deeds. The ones from the safe. We aren't done digging yet. I stood in the basement of the county records office, David by my side. The air was thick with the scent of old ink and dust. We had followed the lawyer's tip to the very bottom of the North Star Holdings files, past the leases, past the lawsuits, to a document dated 1958. Elena, look at the coordinates, David whispered, his finger tracing a line of elegant, hand-drawn calligraphy. Your grandfather didn't just own the land under the Sterling building. He owned the air rights for the entire block, and he left a succession clause. I read the words, and my breath hitched. My grandfather had anticipated a day when the Sterlings would try to push my family out. The clause stated that if the land lease was ever terminated due to moral or professional turpitude, the ownership of the adjacent lot, the one Arthur had been trying to buy for 20 years, would automatically revert to his heir, me. The Sterlings had spent decades trying to expand, but they were trapped by a dead man's wisdom. I wasn't just the landlord of their current building. I was the gatekeeper of their future. And I had just unlocked the gate. This is the end of the road. The empire is gone, the truth is out, and the land has returned to its rightful owner. If you've stayed with me, you've seen what happens when you value integrity over ego. Subscribe now. Don't be the person who watches from the sidelines while others build their dreams. If you're still waiting for a reason to stand up for yourself, let this story be your sign. Tell us in the comments what your first move will be when you finally take your power back. 6 months later, the North Tower was no longer a skeleton. It was a shimmering spire of glass and steel, the crown jewel of the Minneapolis skyline. But it didn't say Sterling at the top. In clean, bold, white letters that glowed against the night sky, it read, Ascendant. I stood on the roof for the grand opening. I wasn't wearing a gown. I was wearing my work boots and a silk blouse. Beside me stood the Engine 22, each of them a shareholder in the new firm. We weren't just employees. We were owners. Arthur Sterling had passed away in a private care facility 2 months ago, his heart finally giving out under the weight of his own disgrace. Marcus was serving the first of an 8-year sentence in a federal prison in South Dakota. I heard he spends his time in the library, drawing floor plans of houses he'll never build. Sarah Jennings? She took a plea deal and disappeared into the witness protection program after turning state's evidence against her father's Ponzi scheme. She got her freedom, but she lost her name. I looked out over the city. I saw the lot next door, the one my grandfather left me. We weren't building another office tower there. We were building the legacy veterans housing, the project Marcus had tried to steal. It was going to be the most sustainable, beautiful low-income housing in the country. I realized then that revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about building a world where they no longer matter. I pulled my wedding ring from my pocket. I'd kept it all this time, a heavy piece of gold that felt like a shackle. I looked at it one last time, then I placed it in the center of a fresh concrete pour on the roof's helipad. I watched the gray slush swallow the gold. Foundation, I whispered. I am Elena, and I am the architect of my own life. If you want to see more stories of justice, betrayal, and the ultimate revenge, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. If you don't, you're just giving the bullies in your life a head start. Leave a comment below with the word foundation if you watched until the very end. Let's see who the real ones are.